The terminal was loud in the way only holiday travel could make it. Not joyful loud, not festive. Just crowded, restless, impatient. Snow pressed against the tall glass windows, smearing runway lights into pale streaks of white and amber. Christmas Eve had turned the airport into a holding pen of frayed nerves, forced smiles, and people counting minutes instead of blessings. Passengers shuffled forward in uneven lines. Wheels rattled over tile. A flat-tired announcement echoed overhead about another delay, followed by a groan that rippled through the crowd. Near the edge of the boarding area stood a man most people tried not to notice. He wore an oversized jacket that had seen better winters, jeans faded nearly to gray, and boots scarred by years of hard ground. His beard was trimmed but rough, his hair cut short and practical. Like mirrors had never been part of the process. At his feet rested a worn duffel, canvas softened by age, one strap repaired with mismatched stitching. On the side of that bag, barely visible unless you knew where to look, sat a small, faded patch. 3 college-age travelers noticed him immediately. One leaned toward the others and smirked. "Christmas Eve, and they've got homeless weirdos just hanging around the gate now." Another laughed openly, probably hoping someone feels bad enough to buy him a ticket. The third shook his head, eyes lingering on the duffel. "Look at that bag. Dude looks like he crawled out of a storage unit." Their laughter drifted through the terminal without resistance. The man didn't react. He didn't flinch, didn't adjust his stance. He stood with his weight evenly balanced, eyes calmly tracking movement around him without effort. Every exit, every corner, every shifting pocket of people was already mapped in his mind, not out of fear but habit. A few steps away, another traveler noticed him for a different reason. The second Marine wasn't in uniform. Just a clean jacket. Boots polished from instinct, posture straight without trying. He had just returned from leave paperwork and was headed home himself. At first he noticed the stance, then the stillness, then the way the man's hand rested near the duffel strap. Not defensive, just ready. Then he saw the patch. His breath caught. He stopped walking. Christmas Eve, Afghanistan. A night every Marine who had heard the story carried quietly, whether they had been there or not. Without hesitation, without checking who was watching, the Marine stepped forward. He came to a precise stop in front of the man with the duffel and snapped into a sharp, unmistakable salute. The terminal seemed to stutter. The laughter behind them died mid-breath. The college kids froze, smiles draining from their faces as heads turned. A few nearby passengers stopped scrolling. A gate agent paused mid-keystroke. The sound of the airport didn't vanish, but it thinned, like the room itself was holding still. The man with the duffel looked up slowly. For a brief moment, something passed between them. Recognition, respect, history that didn't need explaining. He returned the salute, clean, measured, professional. No words exchanged. And before I tell you what happened next, subscribe to the channel and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. It helps more than you know. The Marine dropped his hand and stepped back, blending into the crowd again as if nothing extraordinary had just happened. But everything had changed. The college kids stared at the man they had mocked seconds earlier, suddenly unsure where to look. One swallowed hard. Another shifted his weight. The third glanced around, searching for reassurance that what they had just seen hadn't been real. The man with the duffel returned his gaze to the boarding area, calm as ever. He didn't straighten his jacket, didn't acknowledge the stares. He simply adjusted the strap of his bag and waited. Because for him, recognition had never been the goal. And the truth behind that patch, why it mattered, and why another Marine had saluted him in a crowded airport on Christmas Eve, was something the world was about to learn, whether it was ready or not. What none of them knew yet was that the patch on that worn duffel wasn't a symbol of survival. It was proof of a decision made on a frozen night that brought others home alive. The laughter didn't return right away. It thinned, fading into something quieter, more uncertain as the crowd absorbed what it had just seen. The Marine who had rendered the salute moved on without ceremony, disappearing back into the flow of travelers as if nothing unusual had happened. But the space he left behind felt charged, like the air after a sudden clap of thunder. The man by the gate remained where he was. Same stance, same calm, same worn jacket and faded jeans, but now, eyes followed him differently. The 3 college-age travelers stood stiff, their confidence leaking out in awkward glances and half-formed smiles that didn't quite know where to land. One of them cleared his throat too loudly. Another shifted his backpack higher on his shoulder, suddenly very interested in the departure board. "Did you see that?" The one who'd been filming earlier muttered. "No," the varsity jacket kid said too quickly. "Probably just military guys knowing each other or something." The words sounded weak even to him, because people didn't salute strangers, and they definitely didn't salute men who looked homeless. The man finally bent down and lifted his duffel, swinging the strap over his shoulder with an easy, practiced motion. The bag wasn't heavy to him. Or maybe it was, but he carried weight differently than most. As he stepped forward with the line, an older woman nearby glanced at the patch on his bag, squinting as if trying to place something she couldn't quite remember. She didn't ask. She simply gave him a small, respectful nod. He returned it automatically. Habit. Across the terminal, another announcement crackled overhead, apologizing for delays due to weather. Groans rippled through the crowd. Christmas Eve impatience sharpened again, but it no longer pointed at him. Not openly. The college kid stayed quiet now. The girl with the phone lowered it fully, sliding it into her coat pocket as if embarrassed to be caught holding it at all. She kept stealing looks at the man's boots, then his posture, then his hands. Those hands were steady, not fidgeting, not restless. Fingers relaxed near the duffel strap. Ready but not defensive. The kind of readiness you didn't practice unless you'd needed it once when things went bad fast. The man moved forward another step. A small boy nearby dropped a toy car, sending it skidding across the tile toward his feet. Without looking down fully, the man shifted his weight and trapped it gently with the side of his boot before it could slide under a row of chairs. He bent, picked it up, and handed it back to the child with a quiet nod. "No rush," he said softly. The parents murmured thanks. The boy stared at him with wide eyes, then smiled. The college kids saw that too. Something about the moment unsettled them more than the salute had. People who were pretending didn't move like that, didn't notice things like that. The man returned to his place in line as if nothing had happened. But inside his chest, memories stirred. Not loud ones, not dramatic, just fragments. Snow blowing sideways under floodlights. The low hum of engines cutting through frozen air. A voice over the radio that had gone too calm right before everything went wrong. Christmas Eve years ago, when time stopped being about dates and started being about survival. He pushed it down gently. Not now. The terminal smelled like coffee and wet coats. The world here was softer, slower, and he was still learning how to exist in it without standing out, by choice. He'd been out of uniform for a while now, not because he couldn't serve anymore, but because he'd finished what he'd been asked to do. Some people filled the space after service with noise, stories, explanations. He filled it with quiet. Across the gate area, the Marine who had saluted earlier glanced back once, just briefly. Their eyes met. Nothing passed between them but understanding. No words were needed. None would have helped. The college kids leaned together again, voices hushed this time. "Maybe he's like special forces or something," one whispered. "Or stolen valor," another said, though without conviction. The third shook his head slowly. "Nah, that salute wasn't fake." The man heard them. Of course he did. He didn't turn around. The line inched forward again. Boarding would start soon. He adjusted the strap of his duffel, fingers brushing the faded patch without conscious thought. He wasn't here to teach anyone a lesson. He just wanted to go home. But the truth had a way of surfacing on nights like this, especially when people laughed too easily and judged too fast. And before this terminal emptied out, someone else was going to notice that patch. Someone who wouldn't hesitate. Someone who remembered exactly what it meant to earn it. Because the next person watching him wasn't just curious. He was another Marine, and he knew that patch from a night no one ever forgot. The salute did more than silence the laughter. It changed the way the space breathed. People who had been staring at their phones looked up, confused by the sudden stillness. A woman mid-sentence stopped talking. A gate agent froze with her hand hovering over the keyboard. Even the holiday music piping faintly through the speakers seemed to lose its place. The Marine who had given the salute lowered his hand slowly, deliberately. He didn't rush. He didn't explain. He didn't look at the college kids at all. His eyes stayed on the man with the worn duffel. The man nodded once in return. Not a full salute, not a show, just acknowledgement. The kind exchanged between people who didn't need an audience to understand what it meant. One of the college kids swallowed hard. What was that?" he whispered. No humor left in his voice. The man still didn't turn around, but the Marine did. He was visibly formal now, posture squared, shoulders back, voice calm but unmistakably controlled. "You might want to choose your words more carefully," he said, not raising his volume. "Especially around people you don't know." The kid with the phone scoffed weakly, trying to recover. "Relax, man, we were just joking." The Marine's eyes flicked to the duffel at the man's feet, to the patch, then back to the kid. "Some jokes," he said evenly, "are only funny until you understand who you're laughing at." That should have been the end of it. It wasn't. The delay announcement crackled again overhead, longer this time, more apologetic. Groans rippled through the terminal. The tension returned, but it felt different now. Sharper, focused. The man shifted his weight slightly, a subtle adjustment most people wouldn't notice. But the Marine noticed. So did a few others. Older travelers, veterans maybe, people who had seen that kind of movement before. It wasn't nervousness. It was readiness. The man's eyes tracked something across the terminal, a cluster near the seating area. An elderly traveler slumped forward in his chair, his wife's voice rising with panic as she tried to get someone's attention. "I need help," she said louder now. "Please." Someone. People hesitated, looked around, looked away. The man moved before the announcement finished echoing. He stepped out of line smoothly, duffel left behind, jacket already unzipped. He knelt in front of the elderly man, one hand steadying his shoulder, the other checking his pulse with practiced precision. "Sir," he said calmly, "can you hear me?" The Marine was there in 2 strides, crouching beside him, no questions, no hesitation. "Airways shallow," the man said quietly. The Marine nodded. "I see it." They worked together without speaking again, one adjusting posture, the other signaling space. Someone finally ran to get airport medical staff, but by the time they arrived, the man's breathing had steadied, color returning slowly to his face. The wife's hands shook as she clutched the man's sleeve. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you so much." The man gave a small nod. "He'll be okay." Then he stood and stepped back, already retreating into anonymity. Except the room wouldn't let him. The college kids stared now, no smirks left. The phone hung useless at one of their sides. "How did he?" one muttered. The Marine stood and turned, his gaze sweeping the area, not commanding but grounded. "This man," he said, voice calm and carrying just far enough, "is active duty. United States Marine Corps, returning home for Christmas." A ripple moved through the crowd. Quiet. Real. "He's not homeless," the Marine continued. "He's just not interested in explaining himself." The man shifted uncomfortably. He didn't look grateful. He didn't look proud. If anything, he looked like he wished the floor would swallow him whole. The Marine faced him again and lowered his voice. "With respect," he said, "you don't owe anyone anything, but I won't pretend I didn't recognize that patch." The man's jaw tightened just a fraction. "Christmas Eve," the Marine added. That was all. The man looked at him then. Really looked. A long moment passed. "Yeah," he said quietly. "That one." Nothing more needed to be said. Around them, the terminal resumed motion, but slower now. More careful. Conversations restarted at lower volumes. Eyes followed the man, not with curiosity, but with something closer to respect. The college kids backed away without another word. The man picked up his duffel and returned to his place in line. He stood the same way he always had, balanced, quiet, invisible by choice. But the silence around him now felt different, not dismissive, reverent. What no one in that terminal realized yet was this. The patch on that duffel wasn't just a symbol of service, but of a night so few survived that recognizing it would change everything that came next. By the time the boarding area began to fill again, the air around the gate had changed. It wasn't loud anymore, not in the careless way it had been before. People were still talking, still shifting in their places, still annoyed about delays, but now their voices dipped whenever they passed the man with the worn jacket and the patched duffel. Conversation slowed. Eyes lingered longer than they meant to. The three college-age travelers stood off to the side, no longer laughing. One of them kept glancing at his phone without actually scrolling, like he needed something to do with his hands. Another stared straight ahead, jaw tight. The third kept looking at the floor, replaying the moment he couldn't quite explain. The salute, the sudden change in posture from the Marine, the way respect had entered the space without asking permission. They hadn't known what that patch meant, but they knew it meant something now. The man himself hadn't moved much. He had shifted his duffel slightly with his boot, adjusted the strap once, then returned to stillness. Not performative, not proud, just present. A gate agent approached the counter again, tapping at her keyboard, glancing up toward the boarding area. Her eyes landed on him. She paused, then walked around the desk instead of calling out numbers. "Sir," she said quietly, respectful but unsure. "Are you traveling on standby?" He nodded once. "Yes, ma'am." She swallowed. "May I see your boarding paperwork?" He handed it over without comment. As she scanned it, a middle-aged man nearby leaned toward his wife and whispered something. She hushed him immediately, eyes fixed on the duffel, on the patch, on the posture that didn't belong to someone pretending. A moment later, another service member, Air Force, judging by the bearing and haircut, stood up from a row of seats. He didn't approach. He didn't say anything. He simply stood straighter. The man with the duffel noticed it in his peripheral vision. He didn't acknowledge it. He never did. But the tension in his shoulders eased just slightly, like someone realizing they weren't as alone as they'd thought. The gate agent handed the papers back. "There's been a seat change," she said. "Please remain close." "Yes, ma'am." She hesitated, then added softly, "Thank you for your patience." He nodded again. That was when one of the college kids finally spoke. Quiet this time, unsure. "Hey," he said, not meeting the man's eyes. Man, we didn't know." The man looked at him. Not sharply, not coldly, just directly. "I know," he said. The kid swallowed. "We were just—" "It's fine," the man interrupted gently. "Just be careful who you laugh at." There was no anger in his voice, no lecture, just a fact, delivered the way people do when they've learned it the hard way. The kid nodded quickly, shame written all over his posture. His friends said nothing. They didn't need to. Across the gate, the Marine who had saluted earlier stood near a pillar now, hands behind his back, eyes forward. He didn't stare. He didn't hover. He stayed exactly where he was supposed to be. But when the man with the duffel shifted his weight again, the Marine caught his eye for a brief second. The nod they exchanged was small, but it carried weight. The terminal announcement crackled overhead again, calling out boarding groups. People began lining up, bags rolling, coats rustling. Life resumed its rhythm, but something had been altered beneath it. The man bent down, lifted his duffel, and slung it over his shoulder. The repaired strap held. It always did. As he stepped into line, a woman with 2 kids moved aside without being asked, making space. An older gentleman removed his headphones. A flight attendant watched him pass with a look she didn't bother hiding. Curiosity edged with respect. No one applauded. No one needed to. The Marine remained where he was until the man reached the scanner. Only then did he relax slightly, exhaling through his nose like someone closing a chapter. The college kids watched him bored, their earlier laughter feeling distant now. Small, exposed, and deeply misplaced. None of them spoke again. And as the jet bridge swallowed the man with the worn jacket and the quiet patch, one thing was clear to everyone who had witnessed it. Whatever that symbol meant, it wasn't something you mocked. It was something you earned. What no one in that terminal realized yet was this. The reason the Marine recognized that patch had nothing to do with rumor or legend, and everything to do with a night that almost ended very differently. By the time the boarding announcement finally came, the terminal felt different, not quieter. Airports never truly went quiet, but altered, as if a line had been crossed and couldn't be stepped back over. Conversations restarted in lower tones. Laughter didn't carry as far. People glanced toward the man with the worn duffel more carefully now, some with curiosity, others with something closer to restraint. The 3 college-age travelers stood together a few feet away, no longer joking. One of them kept rubbing the back of his neck, eyes darting between the Marine who had given the salute and the man who had received it. The girl who had laughed earlier stared down at her phone, screen dark, as if unsure what to do with her hands. The third shifted his weight, uncomfortable in a way that had nothing to do with standing too long. None of them spoke. The man with the duffel noticed, of course. He noticed everything, but he didn't look at them. He didn't need to. He adjusted the strap of his bag, fingers brushing briefly against the faded patch. Not out of pride, not out of protection, just habit. The same way some people touched a watch or checked their wallet without thinking. A few rows away, an older couple struggled with an overstuffed carry-on. The bag tipped awkwardly, threatening to spill its contents across the floor. Before anyone could react, the man stepped forward. The movement was smooth, efficient. He crouched, lifted the bag with practiced ease, and set it upright without a word. The couple thanked him, surprised. He nodded once and stepped back into place as if he had never moved at all. One of the college kids whispered, "Did you see how fast that was?" The others didn't answer. Across the terminal, the Marine from the other unit stood near the windows, hands clasped behind his back. He didn't approach again. He didn't need to. The salute had done what it was meant to do. It had said everything that needed saying. Not loudly, not publicly, but unmistakably. A gate agent cleared her throat at the podium. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your patience." The familiar groan rolled through the crowd, but it lacked its earlier edge. Even frustration felt muted now, tempered by something unspoken. The man with the duffel exhaled slowly, grounding himself. Crowds had always been harder after coming back. Too much noise, too many blind spots, too many people who didn't realize how close they stood to one another. He had chosen this life. The quiet, the distance, the ability to move through the world without questions or expectations. Being unseen had its advantages. But moments like this reminded him why staying invisible was never fully possible. A child near the seating area tugged on her mother's sleeve and whispered something. The woman nodded and gently guided her forward. The girl approached hesitantly, holding a candy cane in both hands. She said softly, holding it out. "Merry Christmas." The man froze for half a second, not from fear but from something closer to surprise. He accepted the candy cane carefully as if it were fragile. "Thank you," he said. His voice was low, steady. "That's very kind." The girl smiled and ran back to her mother. Behind them, one of the college-age travelers swallowed hard. "I shouldn't have said that stuff," he muttered. Not quite loud enough to be a full apology, but not quiet enough to ignore. The man didn't turn. "Most people say things they don't understand," he replied calmly. "Doesn't make them bad. Just means they've got more to learn." That landed harder than anger ever could. The boarding lane opened. People began lining up, slower now, more aware of the space around them. When the man stepped forward, the Marine by the windows straightened slightly. Not into another salute, not formally, but with clear respect. The college kids stepped aside without being asked. As the man handed over his boarding pass, the gate agent looked at her screen, then up at him. Her expression softened. "You're all set," she said quietly. "Safe travels." He nodded once and moved down the jet bridge, boots echoing faintly against the metal floor. Each step felt heavier and lighter at the same time. He didn't know if he liked being seen, but he knew this much. The patch on his bag wasn't just cloth. It was memory. It was winter nights and promises kept. It was bringing people home when the odds said not to bother trying. And somewhere behind him, in a crowded terminal on Christmas Eve, a few people would never forget the moment they learned that heroes didn't always look the way they expected, but what waited for him at the end of the flight. And the person who would be standing just beyond the arrival doors would remind him why he had come home in the first place. By the time boarding was called, the terminal no longer felt like the same place. The noise was still there. Rolling suitcases, murmured complaints, the hollow echo of footsteps. But it had shifted, softer, slower, like a crowd that had collectively decided to breathe differently. The man everyone had called homeless stood near the gate, duffel now slung over his shoulder. Nothing about his posture had changed, yet the space around him had. People no longer brushed past without looking. Some nodded. A few looked away, embarrassed. One older couple whispered quietly, not gossiping now, but explaining. The college-age travelers stood a few steps back from where they'd been earlier. They weren't laughing anymore. One of them kept glancing at the Marine who had rendered the salute. Active duty, formal, unmistakable. The kind of salute you didn't fake. The kind you gave only when you knew exactly who stood in front of you. That "That wasn't a joke, right?" one of them whispered. "No," another said quietly. "That was real." The third swallowed hard. "Then who is he?" None of them had an answer. And for the first time that night they understood how dangerous assumptions could be. The Marine from the other unit didn't linger. He hadn't stepped forward to embarrass anyone or to perform. He had done what duty required, recognized someone who had earned it, and then returned to his place in line, as if nothing extraordinary had happened. But something extraordinary had. The gate agent approached the man with the duffel, her voice gentler than before. "Sir," she said, glancing at her screen, then back at him. "You're cleared to board early." He nodded once. "Thank you." No speeches, no explanations. As he stepped toward the jet bridge, a small boy tugged on his mother's sleeve. "Mom," he whispered, loud enough to carry, "was that guy a soldier?" The man paused just for a moment. He turned slightly and knelt so he was eye level with the child. "I was," he said simply. The boy's eyes widened. "Were you brave?" The man smiled. Not wide, not proud, just honest. "I did my job." That seemed to satisfy the boy completely. The man stood, shouldered his duffel, and walked down the jet bridge with the same steady pace he'd used all night. Each step carried him farther from the terminal, farther from the noise, and closer to the one place he hadn't let himself think about too much: home. He took his seat by the window, tucking the duffel carefully beneath the seat in front of him. The patch faced inward now, hidden again. That's how he preferred it. As the plane began to fill, a woman across the aisle leaned over. "Excuse me," she said softly. "I just wanted to say thank you for whatever you did." He met her eyes and gave a small nod. "Safe travels." Outside, snow drifted gently under the floodlights. The engines hummed to life. The plane pushed back from the gate. He rested his head against the window as the airport slowly slipped away, lights blurring into lines and then into darkness. The weight he carried, years of silence, of being unseen, of choosing a quieter life, felt lighter than it had in a long time. Not because he'd been recognized, but because he hadn't needed to explain himself. When the wheels finally lifted off the runway, he closed his eyes and pictured the porch light waiting for him. Not bright, not flashy, just steady. Left on because someone believed he'd make it home. And he would. Because some people don't wear their service anymore. They carry it quietly, all the way home. And if you've been listening this far, subscribe to the channel and let me know in the comments what time it is where you're watching from. It helps more than you know.